Hello, everyone. Welcome to XRM Virtual, the road ahead for the Power Platform. I'm your host for this session, Daryl Labar. And with us, we have Charles Lamanna. We'll get to him later here, but some quick housekeeping topics. We are recording today, so if you don't want to be listed on the recording, get out sooner rather than later. We'll post it on the events page when it's done, and you can watch for a tweet from the XRM Virtual Twitter handle. We are looking for speakers as always, so if you're interested in speaking or if you have a topic you'd like to know more about and you want to get a speaker to speak on that, we can help you out with that as well. Feel free to email Julie at julie.yak@xrmvirtual.com for either speaking or if you have a topic you want to speak about. And our next meeting will be on 6/18 and talk about D365 portals. So check the website and go ahead and get an invitation for that meeting if you haven't done so already. And with not any further ado, I will turn it over to Charles Lamanna, the General Manager of the Application Platform at Microsoft.
Awesome. Thank you, Daryl. Yeah, so what I was thinking for this call, because I think it's a nice little intimate group, is I would do a quick recap of some of the big announcements that we made at Build around the Power Platform, and then take the chance to talk about where our head's at for the next 3 to 6 months from basically what we're going to go ship in the platform, which will go transitively provide a whole bunch of value to Dynamics customers as well. So at Build, the big conversation we were having around the Power Platform was that we now want to, or I guess this has always been true, but we're really doubling down our focus to make sure that professional developers also can get a bunch of value from the Power Platform. And to do that, we've done a bunch of things like the new Power Apps component framework, as well as the associated Power Apps command line interface. And what this allows us to do is it standardizes basically the interface from a developer point of view to go register custom visuals and custom controls. And this is something that we've been in degrees of private preview with MVPs and partners and ISVs for a while, but it's something that we've released out to the open today or last week for model-driven applications. And this has come with the associated tooling and associated infrastructure, so you can actually have a proper developer environment. And as an example, one of the big things that we were demoing last week at Build was the ability to actually open a control up in VS Code, build it from the command line to generate a solution containing that component, and then actually upload it with Azure DevOps into an environment. And this, I think, is one of those good examples of talking about how professional developers have an important role to play in the broader Power Platform. And for folks that come from the XRM side of the house, this isn't anything entirely new. Very standard, very common on that for that customer base, but it is something that we're increasingly focusing on for the Power Platform. In addition to that, we also have been focusing on some new improved Azure connectors. So one of the neat things that got some attention was the ability to connect to blockchain, the new Azure Blockchain services like smart contracts, as well as the ability to go right to a blockchain ledger from the Power Platform. And what's interesting about this capability is that it's the first time we've really kind of simultaneously launched capabilities in Azure, as well as a connectivity to those capabilities from Power Apps and Flow. So that's another core element. And another big item that we went was announcing GA around a bunch of other solution awareness for Power Apps and Microsoft Flow. And we can see that with the solution checker reaching GA, as well as announcing GA for flows inside of solutions, with Canvas apps coming imminently as well. And kind of this is an overarching idea that this is really just the first step towards, but the idea is, from a Microsoft point of view, there's about 16 million active developers using Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code today. There's about 36 million developers using GitHub, and there's about 2.5 million developers using the Power Platform, whether that's Power BI, Power Apps, or Flow. So it's a pretty sizable developer community. In fact, without a doubt, the largest developer community out of any company in the world. But we're trying to go extend the Power Platform developers to a broader base. So people who use VS Code, people who are living in Visual Studio, or people who live in GitHub. And this wave of features was the first example of that. And another place this is going to start and continue to show up is increased Power Platform connectivity into Azure, with the idea that a lot of pro dev functionality should be built and deployed into Azure as opposed to into Power Apps or CDS or Flow or Power BI, but then wired up into the actual Power Platform. So this focus on every developer, as we call it, for Power Platform, whether it be the historical citizen developers or customizers and admins to a C#, Python, or JavaScript developer, is a growing focus, and I think something that's going to get a lot more attention from a Power Platform point of view over the next 6 months. And for folks that are in the XRM land, which I think hopefully is a lot of people based on the name of the meeting, but the big focus there is we're also going to really drill into make application lifecycle management work end to end, and that means we want to make it so our typical customer can use Azure DevOps to run a full CI/CD process for all of their solutions that deploy into an environment or instance. And some of the things that we shipped are just the first elements of that, but that's where we're going to release methodical improvements over the next 12 months and get to a pretty good place around October, November this year to actually make that possible to run CI/CD on top of the Power Apps, CDS, and Flow, and so on. So that's the first thing I wanted to hit on, and maybe I can just take questions on that first, if anybody has any, before I drill into kind of the next 3 to 6 months.
And you should have access to unmute yourself and ask your question. If you don't, let me know, and I'll make sure you can unmute yourself. I'll get started with a question on the blockchain. I know that's something that's a big, exciting word for people. Do you have an example of someone that's currently using that integration that you've described, or is that something that's hoping that someone will take root in that and will use it going forward?
Much more the latter. So it's something that we're working with the Azure Blockchain team and a few prospective customers that are looking to use blockchain to solve imminent business needs, to go get some real world use cases. I don't think we have any full end-to-end examples right now.
And you mentioned the tools that you've come out with. What's the best way for people to go and start playing with those tools for the developers that you're focusing on? How do they find it? How do they get it?
Yep. Yeah. So I think there's a great blog post on the Power Apps blog that covers how to get access to PCF as well as the Power Apps command line interface. In the case of the Power Apps command line interface, you can just easily install that from your Windows console if you already have like npm installed. So that's a pretty straightforward process. And in the case of the Power Apps component framework capabilities, it's pretty lightweight. So if you just go to that blog post, you can go download all that and get started. And I would say even I was able to get the end-to-end demo working with the CLI, the new Power Apps CLI, plus the new component framework in less than an hour. And if I can do that, then you guys definitely can do it pretty quickly. So it's a pretty easy process to get started.
This Power Apps component framework has had multiple name changes. Is this this is the final name for it, and we're going to keep it going forward? Is that the assumption then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, for people that know, it was the Common Control Framework, and then it was the Power Apps Control Framework, and now it's the Power Apps Component Framework. And the reason we call it Power Apps Component instead of Control is our ambitions are to extend a little bit beyond just pure visual controls and make it so that you can, say, bring more data bindings or more assets alongside the control, or even kind of have recursive dependencies where Power Apps Components includes other Power Apps components. Because you can imagine this like if you make a custom grid or a custom list where you actually would want a custom control for each cell or for each item. And control wasn't capturing what we wanted to go achieve from that. That's one piece. And the second is we also announced in Canvas apps for Power Apps the new components capability, where you can use the Studio to build a UI element and then save it and then reuse that over and over again across screens as well as across applications. And our plan is that component concept which you can build visually, as well as this component concept, which you can build with ProDev, will be converging to a single component experience. That way you can kind of have the visually built components using our built-in controls inside your custom component or vice versa. And we think that this ability to mix and match is going to be really important for us as we go drive the convergence of Canvas and model-driven apps, which is one of our top focuses over the next 12 months or so.
And I know that the framework is, you can either, it has a lot of support for TypeScript built into that. Is that something that we'll continue seeing forward as a strong push to encourage people to either use JavaScript or even to potentially use more statically typed language like TypeScript?
Yeah, but I would say TypeScript is definitely what we would recommend and encourage you to use. And we have strongly typed classes associated with PCF available in TypeScript, as well as all the great debugging tools, so you can actually see IntelliSense and stuff in VS Code. I would say TypeScript is the place to be and the place to go from Microsoft generally for web development. So that would definitely be our guidance and recommendation.
Awesome. Big TypeScript fan. Any other questions from the audience?
Great. Yeah, and I think just to kind of go back and belay or maybe romance the point again about what we're talking about with this ProDev, I don't want to say ProDev focus, but ProDev enablement is we for Power Apps, particularly the Canvas app side of the house, historically it's very much been about no code, Office customizer, SharePoint admin type scenario. And on the CDS model-driven side of the house, we have a lot of developer hooks, but I wouldn't say quite in a first-class way. Kind of build was really that warning shot saying we're really doubling down to make sure that a full professional developer can use the Power Platform to be much more effective or efficient and productive when building line of business applications. And this is something kind of is a honing of that focus for Power Platform, because really we want to make sure that we cover that spectrum from no code to low code to full code. And as we go to full code, of course, it becomes much more important for us to integrate with Visual Studio and Azure and VS Code. And that's what you'll see from all the different announcements that we'll be making. But just, I think that's a good thing to call out. And I would say I think they'll between what happened at Build last week, all the announcements we did there, and then what we're going to announce next month at MBAS, it'll be a very important 1 month period from a Dynamics 365 platform plus Power Platform perspective.
So the desire to be able to really be where the developer is comfortable with, either in Visual Studio or VS Code or potentially something else. That's why these tools are just command line interfaces rather than actual plugins for those tool sets. Then that was the intention of that, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's right. And then also the CLI starts to enable continuous integration and continuous deployment / development from Azure DevOps, because like as an example, like this one, I think I can speak really freely from a future roadmap point of view. Our goal is we want to make every component that exists in a solution be source control manageable at a very granular level. And what we mean by that is, instead of checking in like opaque zip files that you generate for a solution, we want to make it so you can actually check into source control, say plugin files, form files, app module files, Power Apps component framework controls. Those can all be checked in individually. Then you can use the command line interface to build a solution completely locally without having to go to the server. And this is really key, because we have an increasing number of customers that could have like 50 developers on a single project, and having 50 developers, as everyone on this call I'm sure knows, collaborating in a single environment or across multiple sandbox environments and then trying to merge solutions together is kind of a giant disaster, right? And it causes all kinds of artificial behavior, like you may split solutions just so you can independently develop. But with this source control driven approach, you'll be able to have people work in their environments, then check in their changes just in the particular files that matter inside like a local branch, and then submit a pull request to master. And you can actually see in a diffable way, like you would normal source code, what's changed. Then as you merge all that together into master, you can then use the CLI to actually compile your solution, and then use Azure DevOps to deploy it to production, or to UAT and then production. And just we want to make that workflow possible. And just as we get more and more capability in Dynamics and the Power Platform, we're just seeing a lot of customers need that depth of complexity because the projects are getting so large.
Yeah, that's definitely been a pain point in CDS projects, trying to deal with all those different artifacts that don't play very well with source control. So that's really nice to see that coming forward. So we do have a question from the chat window. When can we expect export package for SharePoint Forms Canvas apps, which are tied to SPO lists?
Is the export package, so is the idea like to create like a solution file on top of a SharePoint list, like we would normally do for ALM? So the idea is that should be possible today, but it needs to be in an environment that has CDS associated with it. And our plan is that we're only going to support solutioning and environments with CDS. And there's two pieces to that. The first is today you can go create a CDS environment and use that to basically go bind an application or build your Canvas application and then use solutioning. And that works right now with obviously some limitations. But then the second thing is we're looking to see if we can enable solutioning in the default environment, which is where the vast majority of SharePoint or Office-related Canvas apps are saved, because the default environment tends to have CDS behind the scenes, just you don't have full access to it. So that second one is one we're looking at. We're not 100% sure if we want to sign up for doing that, though, to be honest. But we will track that closely. So the net would be, you should be able to go export non-CDS backed apps as long as it's in an environment with CDS today. And the second is, we don't have plans to support solutioning for export and import unless CDS exists in the environment. And then number three, we're seeing if we can use the default CDS instance in the default environment to enable the most common SharePoint scenarios for non-Power Apps P1 or P2 licensed users. So that's kind of the sequence of events. Hopefully that answers the question. Your default environment. Yeah, so for default environment, that's basically where we don't have a timeline yet. I can go check with the team, but my request would be definitely surface this request in the idea site, because that will help us go prioritize it to see if we need to figure out a way to do this more quickly.
I see lots of people typing. Yeah, there we go. Here goes.
I'm looking too. Yeah. Export Canvas apps. Yeah, sorry.
Export Canvas apps without web UI, PowerShell, or API.
Yeah. So that. Let me see that. I'll double check that. I've seen this. We have this in some private preview form right now. I'll double check with the team when this will come out. This would be this summer if it's not already released. And because our idea is, and I think this is a great question, our idea is we will release CLI and PowerShell to do everything you can do in the UI, period. That's a high level goal for us going forward. So you will never, quote unquote, have to use the UI to do any actions, particularly around administration and application lifecycle management. We will have complete CLI and PowerShell support. So you actually should have that relatively soon this summer. To export Canvas apps, if not already. But I know I've seen this demo for my team. And then what is the status of being able to share your Power App outside of your organization? So in the next couple months, or I say if you email me, I can get you into the preview for guest access, which is basically an AD user, which is either a Microsoft account, which is like at outlook.com, or another work account from a different AD tenant, We will have guest access in Power Apps in the next month or two. And if you email me, I get you in private preview even earlier, I think as soon as 2 weeks from now. So that's coming imminently, number one. And I think it's already enabled in the context of embedded Canvas applications inside of Sharepoint, but we'll have the whole stack working this summer. And the second is this summer, we will support an anonymous mode for Power Apps, as well as a B2C mode for Power Apps. So people will be able to log into a Power App with an @Gmail account or whatever Azure Active Directory B2C support, which is basically everything, or anonymous. And look for that. Lots of cool announcements around that next month at MBAS, but that will also be coming this summer.
Well, I'm expecting when that comes out that the amount of Power Apps is even going to jump again, and a phenomenal growth there when people are looking to be able to share that outside the organization. So that's real good news to hear that coming up.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I would say too is, like for folks that have kind of been on this journey with us over the last year and a half, like we had CDS 2, as we called it, which is kind of the relaunch of CDS built on XRM last April, May 2018. Next month at MBAS in June, I'd say that's going to be another big inflection point for Power Apps and CDS. There's a lot of really big announcements we have planned that we've been working on that kind of really reflect what we think the future is in a lot of this space for the next 12, 18 months.
I got a question about sort of the solution management components related to ALM. So our organization splits their implementations and projects into, like you mentioned, pro dev, and then what we call a functional team that does a lot of the build. So what's really Microsoft's vision for introducing ALM around stuff that's built in the system, and then putting that, how to combine that with the pro dev stuff? Where do the solution, or where does that whole journey start? Is it in sort of the stuff that's built in the user interface, and then you lay on top of it the pro dev, or is the vision that the functional team will be able to make changes in the version control management system and merge those eventually?
The last one. So the what our goal is, and I think we'll get pretty close to there'll be warts, but we'll get pretty close to this by the end of this year. The idea would be the functional teams will be able to check in their UI built assets at a granular level into source control in a way that supports merges and diffs. So this is a lot of work on our end from a file format point of view to actually make the file format stable and diffable and actually workable in source control. That's number one. And then number two is with the CLI support, as well as the planned Azure DevOps integration, like we're going to create an Azure DevOps task, you'll be able to build the functional UI components like forms and views and entities, as well as the pro dev stuff, like say custom visuals or custom controls or plugins, or even things that get deployed to Azure, like to an Azure function or Kubernetes service. You can build that all in from one branch in source control and then deploy it at once in kind of a stage deployment. Say you deploy to CDS first, then you deploy to Azure, or deploy to Azure first, then deploy to CDS. All that will be enabled end to end. And the idea is, I think, to solve exactly the problem that you're hinting at, which is it's a very fractured system to manage changes, to diff changes, and to get them deployed today between pro devs and non-pro devs. And basically, we're saying if you want to bring anything in the Power Platform to source control, we want to make that as easy as possible, just like you would for any other pro dev component. You don't have to use source control if you only want to live in the functional world, but we want to make that easy to use.
Okay.
Yeah. So as a large enterprise, we'd like to create environments centrally, but the way it works currently is we need to assign P2 licenses to an account and create 2 environments. The high-level statement I would make is we are going to remove the P2 requirement for any admin functionality in Power Apps. So what that means is, because this is I think a common complaint, like if you want to go to the admin center and go create stuff, you need to frequently have a paid P2 license from Power Apps. we're going to get rid of that requirement completely. Yeah. And I think that's in some degree of rolling out. We just made that decision 3 or 4 months ago, but it just takes time, but it'll come soon.
So one of the things a lot of our implementations have are flows as part of some form of a Power App to move some data around. Is there going to be any additional governance put around that as far as visibility for admins?
There's continued investment around like our data loss prevention policies, like our DLP policies, as well as the ability to go get reporting on top of the number of flows and the flows in your environment or within your tenant. Is that different, or is there a different ask than that?
Yeah, it's a little different than that. I mean, a lot of the organizations, we can see that there are flows hitting the APIs, but we don't know who's created them or how many times, how many loops they've written per se on a certain record type, or how many API events they're chewing up for themselves. So we've seen some performance issues related to people adopting it, which is great. I mean, we want them to use it, but a lot of times it can be expensive.
Makes sense. So I think, if I were to say that the ask would be, I would maybe generalize it, and I think I can take it back to the team, but it would be, say I have a CDS environment, can I go and just see who's hitting my CDS environment from where? Because it could be Canvas apps, it could be model-driven apps, it could be flows, it could be SDK calls, it could be a whole bunch of different things. Would that probably solve the need? So I think
that would help, yeah. And who owns it?
Got it. No, I think that makes perfect sense. So basically, I'll go back to on my end to see what, from an org insights point of view, because that's probably where we would surface it. If I could go to org insights and see what's driving API volume, and then be able to click through to see what is actually like behind that API volume, right? I can see this app ID or this flow ID is doing it, and I could drill through to see who owns the app or who owns the flow, assuming you have permissions.
Correct. Perfect, thanks.
You mentioned Canvas and model-driven apps will merge in about 12 months, and a few months ago we got kind of a down payment on that with embeddable Canvas apps. Will there be other steps in that journey until they finally merge?
Yes. So I can talk about some of the things we're going to do there. The first thing is the Power Apps component framework, which we just announced at Build. That only supports model-driven right now, but if you have a private preview for Canvas, and it's actually literally the same pro dev controls you build can actually work across both Canvas and model-driven applications. And that's kind of like step one, because that means we're actually starting to use the same contracts for controls, as well as visuals can go back and forth between model-driven and Canvas. So that's actually a huge engineering step, and obviously hugely valuable for our customers, but it's a huge engineering step to make that be the same. That's kind of like step one. Step two is we're also working to make the single page app runtime of model-driven and Canvas consolidated. And this is important because it will do two things that are really key. The first is it'll make it so that we can have a single mobile player that can run both model-driven and Canvas apps. And the second is that when you have embedded Canvas apps or model-driven apps back and forth, you don't kind of have to do a full refresh page load when you navigate between pages. The single page app capabilities will stick kind of back and forth, because today the embedded Canvas apps in a form is very opaque from the point of view of model-driven apps. It's just almost like an embedded iframe with some limited context. But like, for example, if you want to pass more data in from CDS, like, it's very complicated, nigh impossible to do that today to the Canvas app. It actually has to go make the call back to the connector. This will solve all those problems. And so that's kind of, I'd say, the big step two we're focused on. And then the step three, before a convergence happens, is we're going to introduce, I would say, we're calling them like screens or pages across the two systems, so that, for example, you can have a Canvas page or like a whole screen, which you use a Canvas Studio to build, inside of an app module. So the idea would be I could have my model-driven view. So I have my grid. I drill into a form, say for an account, and that would be model-driven form. And then maybe I click through on a contact in a subgrid on that account, and that would then load a Canvas screen, which is completely custom in a seamless way, as if it were just like any other form. And vice versa, inside of a Canvas app, I'd be able to actually have a screen, which is itself just a model-driven form or view/grid. And once we have that, we're basically 98% the way there to convergence. And that's kind of happening over the next 12 to 14 months or so. Does that make sense from a progression point of view? And the idea there is just every quarter there should be new and greater value of those two systems coming together.
Yeah, it does make sense. Thanks. You mentioned anonymous and B2C access to Canvas apps. Are there some related portal announcements that you can talk about?
Not quite yet, but as you can imagine, that's how the scenario is most likely going to be enabled. But that's going to be our big announcement for one of our big focuses at MBAS. That's great. Basically is wiring, making that a much more complete story. And kind of that's because the high level thing we talk about with Power Apps is Power Apps today is we think about Canvas or model driven, which are really about like web or mobile experiences. We think Power Apps at its core mission is all about making it easier to build apps wherever that is, and apps over time and where you find them will change. Like for example, we have a prototype video that I think we'll post online at some point, but we've already started to talk about it, of Power Apps running in a HoloLens. And basically we're also seeing how can we go bring like conversational UI. This is kind of a little more forward looking to Power Apps. But the overarching idea is just how can we, wherever employees or customers or partners are, we want to make sure our customers can go deliver an experience in a low code, no code way with pro dev extensibility with Power Apps. And our top line goal, being part of Microsoft and being good Microsoft citizens, is we want to go leverage existing Dynamics assets as well as existing pro dev assets like in Visual Studio or Azure, or Office 365 assets wherever possible. Cool. Any other questions, or I can maybe start talking about some more forward-looking things?
Related to, sorry, I missed the build session. Mm-hmm. Do you have a recommendation for me to check out for the ALM content around sort of the Power Platform itself?
Yes. So we should. There's an hour-long session. I can dig up the link, but there's an hour-long session exclusively about ALM and our improvements there for Power Platform.
All right, I will take a look at that and hold the rest of my questions for that.
Awesome, cool. And then as another interesting little bit is, I would say, we, for the first time ever at Build, I think Dynamics and Power Platform were featured in the main keynote. So if you like watch Satya's keynote, there's a lot of talk about Dynamics and Power Platform being key to Microsoft developers. And the second thing is, if you even go to the Azure or M365 keynotes, there's also active Power Platform, like Power Apps and CDS demos there as well. And kind of all of that is a first ever for Microsoft to really lean into the idea that Power Platform and Dynamics are a top line, top order product line for Microsoft, which is, we're obviously very excited about it. But I think as a community and as experts in the area, it's also a really good signal to the market that we're really going to try to grow this business by quite a bit, get a bunch more customers in the space. Cool. Yeah, and then so from a forward-looking point of view for Power Platform and Dynamics Platform, we're going to do at MBAS next month. We'll actually drop our release notes for October publicly, so that will be another 400 pages of various capabilities that will be coming out later this year. And in the case of across all of Dynamics and across all of Power Platform, one of the big focus areas for October is around artificial intelligence and machine learning. So a lot of things around predictive capabilities for data stored inside of the common data service, as well as start to leverage much more unstructured or cognitive-based data inputs. So like camera, video, voice, text to go drive intelligence. And the idea is we're going to deliver that in context for a bunch of applications, like improve and pretty significantly improve the lead and opportunity scoring for customer engagement. We already have that today, but we're going to support deep customization and using custom features. We're also going to go add support inside the context of Power Apps and do a bunch of interesting AI capabilities. And I can't go into too much depth today, but I would say that is we have 160 people or something working on that space for the last 6-7 months to go deliver a really interesting addition to the core platform around AI and those capabilities. So and that will be something that we feature very heavily at MBAS. And I would say if anyone on the call isn't yet or is evaluating or on the fence of whether or not to go to MBAS, I'd say definitely go check it out. I think there are still spots available. I don't think we're to the wait list yet. And because it's going to be 2-3 days of really deep focus on all the new capabilities that are coming out. And then, so another thing I'd want to call out from a Power Platform point of view is between the pro dep focus as well as the continued focus from the Dynamics business, we continue to have a really, really deep desire to make sure we enable enterprise grade mission critical scenarios on the Power Platform. And again, this is some degree of evolution that we've had over the last 12-14 months. And that's because coming from the Canvas apps inside SharePoint lists scenarios, which maybe aren't as mission critical as say like a call center or sales operations or revenue processing that you'd see in Dynamics. But that is 100% where we're starting to see the most customer uplift and uptake for Power Apps and for the Power Platform. And that is where a lot of our investment is going, is just to go make sure that as people have told me before, it's very much not a toy, very much to go make it real for those enterprise line of business developers or for people building customer facing applications to use the Power Platform and have confidence in it at high scale, high performance, and high reliability, as well as things like governance and monitoring and application lifecycle management. So that's kind of like I'd say like a high level overview of where our head is trending or where our heads are at the rest of this year. I mean, so AI, different app delivery experiences, making sure that we really are enterprise grade from a fundamentals point of view. And I just say if anybody has any questions about that or anything else, I'm happy to help.
Related to sort of the platform continuously evolving and changing, I see there are some stubs for some test suite and testing capabilities in the admin APIs. Are we going to have anything available to the end users or the platform administrators that sort of allows them to manage those going forward, just to make sure that after a release is performed at the platform level, we can verify sort of baseline functionality is still there?
Yeah, so we have, because we kind of have two test harnesses that we're working on. And the idea is to make it directly accessible and manageable by our customers. The first is Easy Repro, which is currently open source on GitHub. And our plan is to go make it so you can even register Easy Repro tests and run those as part of a deployment. And that's a UI Selenium-based, web browser-based test. So that's one good way to do it. And we actually have a bunch of customers who do that already. I mean, they had to do a bunch of work themselves to light it up, but that is something that's possible today. And the second is we're working on back-end tests where at least you can test at an API level, things like create a Decays, convert a lead to opportunity. You can register just basically effectively a .NET plugin type thing that will run whenever we do a platform deployment, as well as you could run it when you actually employ your solution. And that one's a little more forward-looking. Right now we use this internally actually, via our own sanity tests. We're moving a bunch of our tests to this infrastructure because we can run it directly on customer instances and things like that. But so that's probably how you're seeing the stubs. But that's something that we want to go roll out. And this is a continuation of Solution Checker that we already released in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And our idea or our goal is we want to make sure that for all of our customers, number one is they'll run Solution Checker called via CLI or API every time they do a build, just like they use FXCOP. That people will operate with, I'd say, proper like tests, like unit tests and integration tests on their source code, like say against their plugins. But then also, whenever they do a deployment, say to UAT or pre-prod and then prod itself, that they'll be able to go run all these automated tests that we're going to provide the harness and framework for.
Does Solution Checker have CLI already?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I didn't.
I don't think.
I haven't seen one.
Yeah, you have to do it via UI. I think maybe you could wire something up, but that the idea is part of all this ALM work for October. You'll be able to call a Solution Checker just from a build step.
Great. Will those be released as specific tasks, like published tasks by Microsoft inside of the release Azure DevOps pipelines, or will we just need to wrap those in a PowerShell script from a generic CLI task?
So the goal is to have the built-in modules.
Okay.
So and that will be later this year, like October, November, December-ish. But the idea is we want to publish first-class build pipeline tasks.
Great, thanks.
Great. I was wondering, does anybody have any other questions on that? And I'd say now's also your chance if you have any questions you want to ask me about Dynamics CRM or Power Apps or Flow or CDS. Anything I'm happy to help with. I see a question in the chat as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Dynamics B10?
What does that mean? Does that mean on-prem or the actual version? No.
Sure.
Sure. Are you a reporter? No, I was kidding. But so I mean,
just a fan.
So I mean, the thing. So the thing we're trying to do is two things. The first is from an online point of view, we want to decouple version numbers from releases, and that's because when you rev like from say 9 to 10, there's lots of ramifications of how solutioning works and backwards and forwards compatibility. So we're now saying, like, our focus is we will have April and October releases. That doesn't mean we'll rev major or minor version at April or October. And the reason for that is we're going to rev version numbers in April and October only if we're bringing in breaking or non-backwards compatible changes for solutioning metadata or schema. So that means we may not, like, for April, for example, of this year, that release didn't rev the version number. We may or may not rev it in October. We'll have clarity for that relatively soon, but we may or may not rev it. That'd be informed by whether or not we're going to change schema. So from that point of view, we're not going to artificially force a rev to version 10 online. That said, the plan is to have an on-premise release in 2020. And when we have that on-premise release, we'll definitely rev the version number. So whether or not that's 9.3 or 10.0, I don't know yet, but we will have an on-premise release next year. Yeah, and kind of, because I know this is a question I actually get a lot, so maybe I can just provide it here. But I'd say on-premise isn't going to go anywhere for Dynamics CE, certainly not for a while. And the biggest thing is there will be an increasing divergence between what we have on-premise and online. And just the example would be all the AI capabilities we won't ever bring on-premise. And that's just because it's too hard to, bring down all the machine learning containers. And the way machine learning works, it's inordinately expensive unless you have highly elastic compute. So we won't bring all the AI capabilities, but there will be the core on-prem application, and you always can go find extensibility via other means, like use Power Apps online, but CRM on-prem, and mash the data that way. things like that. So does that kind of answer your question? I know it's a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, but the reality is we don't know definitively when 10.0 will come, but we will have an on-premise release in 2020, most likely in the back half of 2020, and we will be shipping every April and October online.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
How about the discussion around using unmanaged solutions in a production environment? Are there ever going to be any changes to policies or even opt-in options for customers to say, in my production instance, I don't ever want to see anything unmanaged or changed. I want all my deployments to be done via solutions that are managed?
Yes, we are exactly going to do that. So we're looking to make it so there's options to go drive enforcement. So this is what we're thinking of doing more broadly than even unmanaged solutions. Is there's a bunch of things we know that we make possible and customers do, but it's bad. Like, you will eventually hurt yourself if you do it in production. So we want to create a strict mode, which you can enable on an environment, like say your production environment. And once in strict mode, you wouldn't be able to bring unmanaged solutions. And there's actually a bunch of other customization things we will take away because we know it just causes huge problems for customers. Think of like the critical warnings in Solution Checker. Like, we want to go make it so you literally cannot import a solution that has a critical warning into an environment if you have strict mode on. And strict mode will be something people can opt into at first, but our idea would be over time we would want to graduate things from strict mode into all organizations. And that would be at an April or October moment where we have ample warning for our customers. But that's the plan. That's absolutely the plan.
All right. No, that sounds really good. It's just we lose some level of control as advisors to customers, and then they make poor decisions themselves. So if we can help them not hurt themselves, it's really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of sharp edges in the platform, and we don't like put bumpers or guards on them, and we just tell people go run around and play, and then we get frustrated. The customer gets frustrated when they end up hurting themselves. So 100%, we want to go bring much stricter checks into the platform to make sure that customers don't have issues like that in the future.
So I think Aaron has a good question related to the .NET platforms in the chat. He's asking if there's any plans for the D365 CE SDKs to support any of the new .NET Core 3.0 capabilities.
Yes. Because I know Matt Barber, I was talking to him last week, and he was telling me, I think for the first time we have everything working on .NET Core. So that is absolutely the plan for the client SDK. And due to some of our lobbying, some of the things that were chosen to be brought forward in .NET Core were like at WCF client to actually make it tenable to do this. But yeah, this is our plan, is to support .NET Core from client SDK and support it more generally. On the server side, we want to go move to .NET Core as well. I mean, not that you guys maybe necessarily care, other than just an interesting factoid, but there's a lot of things you have to work through because .NET Core doesn't support WCF server, which is very, very critical for us. So we have to figure out that plan. But anyway, so we're definitely going to support .NET Core, and that will be, I'll expect in the next 3 months, probably actually much sooner in the next month. And I see another question. We can see Dynamics Admin Portal pointing to new Power Platform Admin Portal, which will be the new admin portal for all the environments, Dynamics 365 Power Apps and Flow. And the answer to that is yes. We plan on converging all of the admin portals, of which there are like 3 or 4 today, into one experience, which will be the Power Platform Admin experience. And then for Dynamics 365, we have an AD admin role, but when will we get it for Power Apps and Flow? That is a good question. I know we've been talking about that on my team. I don't know what the timeline is, but I can follow up, or if you drop me a note, I can route that to the right people to share a timeline and roadmap for the AED well-known security group for Power Apps and Flow. And then when will Power BI eventually share same environments container instead of workspace? It will continue as is for now, although we are doing work today to figure out what our story is around this. So I think this is something we recognize is confusing for customers, and we're working to. We don't have a solution yet, so that means it's probably at least 12 months away before we have a meaningful solution, because we haven't even kind of designed or spec'd out what that solution will look like. But it is something we're tracking, and the more you surface that as a pain point, the more you can help us accelerate that. Cool. Great. I don't know if there are any other questions, but I'd say if anyone has a follow-up, feel free to email me or connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Happy to help however I can. I think there's a lot of exciting things coming in the future, and I am very happy that the XRM community is so engaged when it comes to Power Apps and CDS. And I'm really glad that we're able to kind of leverage that expertise and familiarity to go accelerate the platform based on all the learnings we already have from the dynamic side of the house. So thank you for all the great questions and great feedback.
Thank you for joining us, Charles, and spending your busy time with us. We really appreciate it, and it's been great getting to know you and get to see all the fun technical knowledge you can deep dive into, as well as just the business knowledge and the practical knowledge that affects our customers and our customers' customers. So thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.